There you are, Mina. Mina, do you hear me?
Okay, hi, Brenda. Please meet.
Hi, Sandra.
No,
Hi.
that's fine. I'm just trying to. There's Sandra. She's online wearing her mask. That's cool.
That's right.
So I just want to make sure that we
Hi,
have
Mina.
it.
Great to meet you.
Hey, same here. Great to meet you.
Okay, she's seems to be online.
Yeah.
And who else is online? Christian? Who's on?
Nizar.
okay.
Do you hear us in the room?
Yeah, but we don't have the owl yet, so we
Okay.
hear you by through laptop's speaker.
Okay.
Mhm.
But you have the owl there?
No. No.
But Tyler's not here yet, so we're seeing something.
Okay. Well, we just have two people in the waiting room right now anyway. So, and Ruth just emailed me asking where the room was. So you might want to go looking for her. She shouldn't be far.
Yeah. There's a lot of silence. Hello, Tyler. How are you?
Nizar, we're working. Like I'm actually unexpectedly not there. So,
I
it's been
see.
a little bit
Yeah,
more
no
challenging
problem at
than
all.
usual.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. Even in this today's era where we are talking about AI doing this and that and taking over the world, we first cannot figure out how to kind of do video meetings smoothly.
That's right. We're a little ways away from that yet, I think.
Yes. Great strides on one end, very surprising roadblocks on the other.
That's right. Now,
Yeah.
I'm just really surprised we only have two people in the waiting room because we had 65 people sign up.
Mm.
I
I mean,
think there's
a lot of times people do join in like during the first 10, 15 minutes
Yeah.
of the event. So
I'm gonna
Are you a professor or just a regular student? Oh, yeah. How did you find out about the event? I'm on.
oh there. Numbers are going up. We've got 84 registrations actually.
it's
Um,
amazing.
but 4 of them in the waiting room right now.
Mhm.
Oh, let me just see here.
Could have been that some people registered even though they were planning to attend in person just because they felt the need to kind of RSVP. So
Maybe, yeah. We're just gonna get started slowly here today.
Mhm.
We're just gonna get started slowly here today. Sometimes that's what happens.
Yeah. Sounds totally good.
Oh yeah, people are coming in.
Also, my opening remarks are totally kind of squeezable into 15 minutes instead of 20 minutes if need be. There's a lot of wiggle
yeah.
room.
I'm gonna be very short on the front end. I'm just gonna welcome everybody. I'm gonna look here. Cool. That's right. I'm gonna let people in though, if that's okay with you, Nisarg. Mina, are you around?
Can you repeat your question, Sandra?
We have 10 people in the wait room right now, and it is 1:02. I'm gonna just let them in and we'll just chat a little bit online here. And is that okay with you?
It would be better, like, if we could wait a few more minutes, because we don't have so many people here yet. So, but your decision.
Yeah, I'm just worried that people are wondering what's going on when they're in the wait room. You stay on mute and whatever, and I'll just let them in. We'll just chat a little bit here. Okay.
Sure. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm assuming online you folks can hear me just fine. All right. Thanks, Nisarg. All right, we got a thumbs up there. We're running a little bit behind in the room right now, so really, I'm really excited to see so many of you coming in here today for this fabulous panel that we have, and yeah, just letting some more people in, and we just started letting you in to let you know we're gonna get started with a few minutes of a delay here. For those of you who just came in, you are absolutely in the right place for the Black Box AI super panel. We are going to get started in a couple of minutes. There's just a little bit of a delay in the room, and we're all just patiently waiting for things to be sorted out. And maybe Sandra should get her light situation sorted out too. Give me 1 second here. All right. Feel like I'm going to be the repeat announcer here. So I'm going to announce again that I'm excited to see all of you here online and in the room. Oh, look at that. I think we've got the owl working in the room now. Really excited to see all of you. We have a little bit of a delay in the room getting started here today, but looks like they're really close to being ready. And we're just gonna wait patiently for another minute.
Now we can. Now we can. Now we can.
They're getting really close.
Yeah. Okay. We have
Someone else got some microphone open.
that's
Sure.
Should I try to say something? So we don't hear you right now, but that's I think Cristián has the owl, is that right? So Cristián, you would need to unmute.
No, Sandra, we have no owl.
No, it's my computer.
Okay, all right, perfect. We see you, and I think that's all gonna work really well, as long as you only have one computer with the sound on.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, that just need to make sure that in the room there is only one computer with the microphone on and sound.
Okay. All right, so then I think we're good, right? Ready? Ready or not? Here we go. And they're still talking. 5 seconds.
1 second, please.
I think the reason that we are hearing echo even when there is only one microphone unmuted is that I think the other people in the room would also have to mute their speakers, because otherwise
Yeah,
it's
no, it's already done.
oh,
Miss
it's
Ark, sorry.
done. Perfect.
Yeah, it's already. Just
Yep.
let me increase volume here.
Yep. Sounds good. This is perfect.
Yep. Perfect. So all good. Now, just doing the sound check. Can you hear us now?
We
Yes.
hear you perfectly.
Perfect. And no one is resounding. Can you, the audience on the back, can hear the computer? It's all the way
right.
up.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Okay, so thank you everybody for the patience here, and thanks everybody for making this happen, even though I'm not in Ottawa, so really appreciate that. I'm here, we're ready in the room, Louise and all that. Shall I start introducing myself, getting us going? Yeah? Okay, all right, all right. So welcome everybody. I'm Sandra Schittel. I lead the Inclusive Innovation Research Cluster at the Institute for Science, Society and Policy at the University of Ottawa. And today's event is co-organized between the ISSP and the Inclusive Innovation Hub. You're going to hear a whole bunch from the speakers, and they're going to do introductions and all that in a moment. But I do want to open up with actually not a land acknowledgement, but an Indigenous affirmation. I'm going just trying to pull up my screen here in order to do that. At the University of Ottawa, we use a land acknowledgement, not an Indigenous no, the other way around. We use an Indigenous affirmation, not a land acknowledgement. And these the Indigenous affirmation is in the spirit of what would have traditionally happened back in the day in this area. So, you know, when people gather to trade or to come together for deliberations or you know, events like we're here for today, they would have traditionally acknowledged the land, the people on the land, the ancestors. They would have acknowledged the hospitality shown to them. And it is in this spirit that the Indigenous affirmation of the University of Ottawa was formulated. And we are actually asked to say the affirmation as it was written, because a lot of thought and prayer went into that to develop it that way. So I'm going to do that. Nimanajiananig mamiwilini anishinabeg ogog ka nagarawabarajig iyo aki eko washkat. Akonongom egawikat ki megwewach. Nimanajiananig kakina anishinabeg ondaje kaye ogog kakina eniyagizijik enigokamiga kanadang. Eji ondapinangig endawajan odawan. Ninisida wananig kinawenda mojik kije kikindamawan. Weshkinigajik kaye kejiyadizajik. Nigije wen mananig ogog kaningani songedejik. Weshkat nongum kaye ayankach. Miigwech. So I would like to hand it over to the room now. And over to Louise Earle, I believe. Hope I'm getting a nod here. Louise Earle has been absolutely fabulous in organizing the speaker series, and she's going to do a bit of an introduction, and then we'll go over to the panel. And actually, I have to say one more thing. I probably have to step out. I'm actually out of the country right now with a bit of a situation on my hands. So I just really want to welcome you all again. Appreciate that you're here, and apologize for having to step out shortly. But you're in really good hands.
There we go. Hi. Okay. My name is Louise Searles, and it's my honor and pleasure to introduce the panel today. And have you lost me?
No, you can.
Okay, you're good.
No, you're not. Just mute it.
Oh, okay.
Because we only can have one mic open as the work.
Okay.
I'm doing the IT as well.
Oh, thank you, Cristián. So first of all, I'd like to start by thanking the Inclusive Research Cluster of the Institute for Science and Society Policy here at University of Ottawa, as well as the I2 Hub, for making this Inclusive Innovation Spirit Speaker Series possible. Because this is a hybrid session, and as we've already seen, we have lots of technical issues to overcome. Can we ask the online participants to put their questions in the chat? Let the speakers finish their speaking, and then we'll get to the questions. And the same goes for the people in the room. If you want to jot your questions down, we'll hold all the questions until after everyone has spoken. Also, if you don't want to be, we are recording, and if you don't want to be recorded or to preserve your own confidentiality, don't use your name, don't say anything on camera, but you can put things in chat. We are recording the session. So since we're behind, I'd really like to quickly introduce the session and the panel. And if you want more information on anything, it's i2hub.ca. So today's session is hoping to extend the trope of the black box to explore the different types of black box problems that are happening across AI socio-technical systems from cradle to grave. They will explain all of that to you. So I'd like to welcome our three experts. Two of them are in the room, and one is somewhere in virtual world. So we have Dr. Ruth Bankey, and Ruth is a board director of the I2 Hub and a very experienced researcher focused on leading practices and inclusiveness in the development of artificial intelligent technologies. We have Dr. Cristián Bravo, and he is an associate professor in the Canada Research Chair in Banking and Insurance Analytics at the University of Western Ontario, and the director of Banking Analytics Lab. He's also our IT resource for the day, so thank you. Okay, his research focuses on data science, analytics, and credit risk, particularly exploring multimodal deep learning, causal inference, social network analysis to understand consumer financial institution relations. And then we have Dr. Nizar, and I apologize, Dr. Nizar Shah, who is an associate professor of computer science at the University of Toronto. He's also the research lead for ethics of AI at the Schwartz Reisman Institute for Technology and Society, a faculty affiliate of the Vector Institute for Artificial Intelligence, and part of the board of advisors of the nonprofit AIGS Canada. So that is my welcome to everyone. I'm going to turn it over to Ruth, Cristián, and Sega. Dr. Shah. Okay.
Mute yourself.
And we are mutiners.
So I would like to thank everybody here today. Again, made a very Nizarg, it's a good thing you didn't do the 20-hour drive there and back from Toronto, because, you know, but maybe I would have had two IT specialists then. The majority of this sort of event is going to be a panel discussion. And we're really looking, as was pointed out by Louise, for questions and the kinds of comments that you might have for the different panelists. The majority of the discussion today will be from Drs. Bravo and Dr. Shah, who will both be discussing an aspect of a kind of systemic black box issue within AI systems, specifically and really hoping, because the issue of what is a systemic black box, and using that trope really refers to the idea that there are many things. For example, the black box refers to the fact that there's many things within an algorithm that inherently we either are concealed from us, they are considered too complex for us to understand, and therefore are either unknowable or just should be sort of left alone to sort of operate. And extending that to actually the wider systems in which disruptive emerging technologies and digital and AI happen, we have example of these kinds of things that are concealed from our everyday practices and views, things that are considered too complex or convoluted to sort of be exposed and discussed. And we should just sort of let happen, that we actually do need to discuss, that we do need to demystify in order to better understand how to navigate this incredibly important space that is becoming more ever present and also more ever tangled in existing socioeconomic, political, environmental structures. So there were lots of ways in which this panel could have, the kinds of discussions we could have had. We could have looked, for example, at the hidden labor and issues of labor and sort of those kinds of considerations that are happening within these systems that often are actually not being discussed or are concealed from view, and how these sorts of value chains impact the system. We could be looking at the environmental costs, which are increasingly being discussed, but still really, in many ways, have not been fully exposed or sort of explored within this domain. We could have looked at the sort of history of disruptive technologies and things like AI and automation. For example, the mechanical Turk, both historical and contemporary. What I think we're going to be doing today with both Professors Shaw and Brava Roman is exploring a really foundational aspect that I hope will not only help us to really engage in a number of questions, both from a technical and a sort of societal sort of viewpoint, but they're foundational in that they address one of the main areas of concern around black boxes, which concern fairness. And so in the context of these two presentations, we're going to be exploring the idea of the black boxes, or the things that we need to better understand that are happening in this realm of how fairness, how decision-making that is unbiased, or that is fair, or that is transparent is happening. And in this case, what's also really opportunistic is that we have two people who have experts, and they have expertise not only from their academic positions, but actually from they not only do academic work, they also both ground their work in everyday practices that are happening in financial systems, in the not-for-profit sector, in NGO sort of worlds, relative to economic systems and financial transactions. So I think for today, and as our surprise, we're going to start with Cristián, because I think you're going to find that there's a really interesting complement of both of your presentations, where I think yours actually follows really nicely in response to Cristián. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Professor Dr. Bravo.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. It's always a great pleasure. I've been having the fortune, I say, to talk to Ruth and to work with Ruth for a long time. And now, what, a year and a half now?
Yeah,
We've been working
no, it's
together?
been 2 years.
2 years, yeah. Well, tempus fugit, right? As I said, I'm going to show you a small presentation if the system allows it. We have been trying, the reason I ran away, we have been trying to spotlight for everyone this camera, which is now right now. I know that Mina Yahani has that computer has host, so maybe, yep. So that's the person that should spotlight our camera. Right click on my face and spotlight for everyone, and that should work. Otherwise, if you make me host, I can do it from here. But in the meantime, you are going to see, I'm going to start sharing my screen, right? Yay, I can. That's already a win. And give me 1 second, please, to bring up my slides. It's just a relatively short presentation. And it just coincided super well that the reason I'm here in Ottawa and I'm not in London, Ontario, is that I've been for 2 days now in Parliament talking to all our parliamentarians in topic of fairness in AI. And I've been fortunate to work with a lot of regulators. And it came to a point where the regulatory aspect is falling short. And for reasons I hope to explain and to clarify in this presentation, we actually need involvement from our parliamentarians to make some very strong societal decisions that we cannot solve with algorithms. I hope that that's the message I leave you after my, 20-minute of intervention today, right? I'm happy to answer any questions about this. And I think that this is a topic I'm super passionate about, because I honestly believe that there is a growth aspect, and that worked. Now the video spotlight, thank you very much. And I think there is a very strong aspect here of how we make the societal decisions that are necessary in order to safeguard the use of modern AI. What I'm going to show you today is that this is a problem that we have been creating for 50 years. This is not a problem of ChatGPT onwards. This is a problem that comes from the very first use of statistical models in the 70s, and we just didn't know. And that has created a set of structural inequalities in our financial system that are going to take a significant amount of effort across all involved actors to unravel. And that's my talk. So my introduction here is about trustworthiness and trustworthy AI in financial services, or inclusive AI. I'm sorry for the misconception. Some people, trustworthy means that you can trust in the systems. What I actually want to say is about inclusive AI and how to make it more fair for everyone involved. So a little bit about my group. I'm not going to speak very much. I have a lab, lots of people. That's it. You have a QR code, go to my website. You can see what we're doing. I post everything there. Going to see a lot of pictures of me and my team drinking beer or something. One thing that we do believe to be very fortunate is that we work with a lot of institutions worldwide, from globally systemic banks to regulators all over the world, think tanks, lots of universities, great scores. So I think that one thing I'm super proud of my group and what we have created is that we have gained the trust of regulators, governmental institutions, and the private sector, right? And they are all willing to collaborate with us. And that's something that I'm super proud of having had built, to be honest. It's not easy because the incentives of everyone involved here, as I'm going to discuss, are many times contradictory. Okay, so AI in financial service and the relation to this. So stats and AI have been in financial services forever. Banks are monolithic, but they are very quick to adapt things and statistical processes that can reduce their losses or increase their bottom line. They're very fast at doing that. There is a reason that JP Morgan is investing $15 billion in AI technologies across their business, which is, you can see it in two ways. For a bank that's valued at $1.2 trillion in assets, it's not that much. But when you compare it, that the big announcement in the Canadian budget was a $2 billion investment, and JP Morgan, one company, is spending 8 times that, right? Really puts it into perspective, right? So this is something that it has always been there. From credit scores to fraud detection to cybersecurity, right? Credit scores are the one statistical model you're probably most familiar with. We all have them. You can get it from TransUnion, probably from your bank, right? But every bank has their own. there are many more systems internally. How they detect a fraudulent transaction. If you have ever gotten a message, it's like, oh, we have detected a weird transaction. Send one to approve it. Yeah, that's a machine learning model that's analyzing how you purchase, where you have been, where are you purchasing, your frequency of purchasing, monitoring and summarizing all of your activity online with your credit card to try to detect if something is anomalous or not, right? Propensity scores is saying like, okay, you have a credit card with me. Do you want to buy a mutual fund, or are you a mortgage? Are you looking for a mortgage? How do I get you to get another product? Cross and upselling, that will be the specific term, customer analytics, and a long, etc. There is a study that says a modern bank, medium-sized bank, has upwards of 1,000 different statistical models that are at any point working in their operations. They are all will be in what we call AI today. Many of them use XGBoosting. Some of them are text-based models. The level of sophistication is huge. I know because I worked there 5 years before going into a PhD, right? So I was the one building, right? I work in credit risk and I work in customer analytics. So I know those two models super, super well. So it's completely normal. You see one, probably your credit score. And there is a lot of news sometimes that speak about how this may bring structural biases and blah, 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 blah. But that's one out of literally a thousand, or sometimes many thousands. So these things are fully ingrained into the financial system. And now here comes the thing. Where do the sources of systemic biases come from AI, right? In Canada, we have something that is not unique, but it's not completely decided. We have two regulators for the financial system. We have one that's called a prudential regulator. The prudential regulator focuses on the stability of the financial system. They are the Office of the Superintendents of Financial Institutions of Canada. Their mandate is, we care about the financial stability of Canada. Whatever else is seen by the FCSA. I think I got the letters right. Financial Consumer something I should know. And the fact that I don't know by heart the acronym says a lot, because that's the one that's related to conduct on how banks and financial institutions relate to you and me. Guess who has the biggest budget? The stability one, right? Because that's the one in the headlines. That's the one that really, if they screw up, we don't have money. Simple as that, right? But the conduct one, the one that really says, oh, you know what? You are being discriminated against, right? They do not have the power to force a change of conduct. They do non-binding resolutions. And there is some sort of agreement in the system to kind of respect what they say, but they do not need to. So a bank gets a letter from the FCSA, and they get to decide if they want to. And the letter says, can you pretty please not be super unfair to everyone? And they say, okay, sure, okay, I'm not going to be super. But they are not binding. They do not have the power to intervene. OSFI, on the other hand, they have teeth, and big ones. They can stop a bank from even lending $1 if they want. They have the power. They can close the bank. They can take control of it. And that has led that the consumer side of the financial system is a lot less, or is a lot weaker in the sense of protections than the stability of our financial system, which is actually pretty good, right? So there is no clear laws regarding what should be protected in terms of the access to financial system beyond the Charter of Human Rights that we have here, right? Beyond that, it says, do not discriminate against this and this and that, right? I'm going to show it in a second. There is nothing there that says, so nothing like the US's Equal Opportunity Act or something. I think that's for trade that says everyone should have a clear opportunity to access loans in this and this and that. We don't have that agreement. Let me give you a few examples. And transgender people, for example, in Canada, have had to go to banks because their voice while they are transitioning does not match the gender that they declare. So they are considered to be fraudulent, right? Direct source of the biggest type of potential bias in the use of machine learning models. Credit scores are super known to be biased by something I'm going to explain in 2 seconds. And the reason is that the concept that was leading in the use, remember, these models have been in use since the 60s, was fairness through unawareness. You cannot use these variables. Is there a correlation? You got to literally sue the institutions, right? And there are some judgments and there is case law that says, yes, we won't, right? We won't use this particular variable because it's a cause of structural inequalities. But unless until someone goes to say, this is a particular variable being used in credit scores, and this variable has a direct relationship to these other protected characteristics, it is not illegal to use it. And I'm going to speak about it. In Canada, they are the ones that are right here at the bottom: citizen, race, place of origin, ethnic origin, color, ancestry, disability, the list that you're seeing there. Those are the ones that are protected. This does not work. As simple as that. This is a terrible way to do fair. The problem here is confounding. There are many variables that are actually explaining something. One bank in the UK got in trouble in the 90s because they were using the first letter of the last name of the person as a predictor. And that one is correlated with ethnicity. Right? And they got in trouble because when the regulator went, the conduct regulator went and said, okay, why are you using this variable? They said, well, it's predictive. Yeah, but why? Right? They weren't able to explain it, right? And it was clearly correlated, and they got I think it was something like $500,000 fine, and it was forbidden to use in the UK, right? Something like that. That can happen a lot. And this is the list of Wikipedia. So Wikipedia has even a website, like a page that's called Criticism of Credit Scoring Systems in the United States, that comes with all the sources of unfairness. So it's so well known that it even has its own Wikipedia, right? And here we're going to enter into the nitty-gritty, and one reason I love this field of study is because I had to study law, engineering, computer science, business, regulation. It's all involved in this, and that's the reason I got into here. I love the multidisciplinarity of this aspect. Is what does it mean to be impacted according to case law? In Canada, there are 2 different definitions. Differential treatment, that's direct discrimination. You are a man, you get more loans than you. Simple as that. And I put that explicitly in my account. That is illegal, goes directly against the Charter of Rights, right? However, the much more pervasive and much more significant is the disparate impact, where people are treated equally in the face of the policy, in the letter of the policy. But when you see the outcomes, you see that there is favoritism of one group versus the other. The problem of the use of AI systems when we're pursuing fairness is that we need to take a look at the disparate impact that is not per se illegal. It does not go against any law. But the outcomes that we observe do. And that is something that most people will say, no, it should be illegal. If you ask any Canadian, should be illegal to discriminate by gender, they will probably, with a high certainty, will tell you yes. We'll tell them, well, what about disparate impact? You're going to get blank stares. But when we need to worry about is the disparate impact when we're implementing these systems. One other important point is about fair and unfair discrimination. The systems, AI systems, are built to discriminate. That's their leitmotif. They exist to differentiate to whether I give you something or I don't. Should you get a loan or not? What's the probability of you doing something or not? And we should make the differentiation between undesirable discrimination over concepts that we need to eliminate and unfair discrimination. Fair discrimination will be if whenever you receive money, you're wasting it in the system, you shouldn't get a loan because that impacts everyone else's rates, everyone else's risk. If you never intended to pay back, you probably shouldn't get it. That's fair. Probably, I don't know, maybe you disagree with me, but that's kind of agreed that it's fair. Okay? If we're seeing, due to disparate impact, that women are 1.2 times less likely to get a loan than an financially equal man, that is unfair discrimination. And it's the outcome of a disparate income caused by how we use the variables. And that is the key and what that makes this problem so complicated. To finish my intervention, and I don't know how I'm doing about time. I'm sorry. Yeah, we're good. Okay, super, thanks. There are three ways to see fairness. Independence, that is that the final decision is completely independent from the original variables, so there are no confounders, no anything. Separation, which means that each decision individually is without difference, but there can be differences between groups. So for example, men and women get the same probability of being accepted or the same probability of being rejected, but those probabilities are different between each other. And the third that I'm just going to very briefly introduce because Nizar has a lot of slides about that is group fairness or sufficiency, in which the probabilities are calibrated by group. I'm going to let him explain what that means, right? And here is the problem. If your decision is binary, yes, no, these three criteria are mutually exclusive. So you need to decide ex ante which one you're going to follow. You cannot be fair in all three. It's impossible, mathematically impossible. You can prove it. If your decision is three things, then you can. But most decisions are, I give you the loan or I not. You get the mortgage or you don't. In that case, and the reason I'm here in Ottawa, and I was speaking to parliamentarians yesterday, was because this is a decision that needs to come from politics, not mathematics. Needs to come from society. What do we decide for every high-risk application of AI? What type of fairness are we pursuing and how? Then bring it to me. By all means, I can design, and probably Nizar much better than I can, the best algorithm in the world to satisfy that. But if I create one for separation or for sufficiency, and tomorrow our honorable say that it should be independence, then all my models is wrong. And that's the reason why financial institutions today have no incentive whatsoever to tackle the fairness problem, because they know that one act of parliament and all that money is wasted. That is a core issue in today's world in terms of fair access and fair systems and fair AI. So I just said this, but the other point I want to make is that this means that in the short term, when we decide for a type of fairness and when we pursue it, there is going to be a short-term loss, economic loss for the institutions themselves. But there is a very strong argument to be made that bigger and better access to funding to these underserved groups will lead to long-term economic growth. I mean, and we have seen that. We have very strong evidence. This is not a guesswork. Every time that a group that has been underserved gets better access to financial services, we get more growth because we get more small businesses. On average, one small business that gets a loan creates one more job. On average. That's huge, right? When we think that only 20% of small businesses in Canada get a loan and 80% are self-funded, there is a lot of growth, potential growth lying around there, right? And that's the idea. So what to do? I'm going to leave a lot of this to Nisark. I just want to give some ideas. Here, I could make a very highly technical presentation with a lot of equations. I'm not going to do that. Confounding, as data grows, confounding at some level is inevitable. In my personal opinion, and this is a personal opinion, and again, it's up for discussion, the best way to do this is to correct. So it's to take models that, and then by measuring the sources of bias, we can remove. That does require, though, is that we need to now do something that we're not doing, which is collecting data on protected characteristics. That means a regulatory decision or an act of parliament that leads to force institutions to voluntarily request, right, your demographics so it can be used and reported what biases they have, and then they can implement any of the amazing methods that Nisark is creating, right, in order to eliminate those biases. But you see, we need a change at a societal level first. We need acts of parliament, we need regulation, we need people loving, and honestly, something that I realized yesterday that was extremely difficult to do, to let the people, our decision makers, to understand why this is so hard, to understand why they need to be involved and what they need to do in order to properly understand this. Okay?
And I was going to say, and with that, I think on the what to do and what about other models, but as well also for a connected but also slightly different perspective. I'd like to turn it over now to Dr. Professor Shin.
Right. Okay, I think Cristián, you might need to stop sharing. It says, okay, perfect. Thanks. Can you see my slides? Okay, I think I can see behind you that you can see my slides. So perfect. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here. And thanks, Cristián, for setting up the scene so well. Actually, some of the I just gave a presentation at the Vector Institute last Tuesday, which I think would have been an excellent follow-up to your presentation. That's the presentation that talked about the different ways to measure group fairness and kind of how do you actually. So you are absolutely right that we cannot just rely on fairness through unawareness, and we actually, I mean, most of the metrics that people use in the literature right now do explicitly require the knowledge of the protected attributes, and if we don't know the protected attributes, then the model is just going to kind of use correlations and we won't even be able to tell. So might as well kind of use them, and then what's the right way to use these protected attributes. And I kind of talk about the impossibility results that you talked about, how we can not achieve some of these different metrics altogether, and then kind of ways to go around them. And also I talked about how some of these metrics are defined for binary decisions only. So they, I mean, these metrics rely on these statistical rates of false positive, true positive, false negative, true negative. So you really need to be talking about binary decisions, whereas in real life, a lot of decisions are not binary. So for example, the bank doesn't just decide to give you the loan or not give you the loan. It also sets the terms of the loan, right? So it sets the interest rate, sets the term length, it sets kind of the how much prepayment you can do, and so on and so forth. And that when you kind of try to apply these fairness metrics, you often, because they require you to kind of specify the problem as a binary decision-making problem, you kind of reduce the problem down to a binary problem. And that kind of, I talk about how that can lead to fairness gerrymandering, where a model can seem to be fair in the binary space, but in the underlying actual decision space, it's not really fair. However, for this panel, I chose to go with a slightly different presentation that makes a slightly different point, just because I think the previous that presentation would have been a bit too technical, but its recording is freely available. Vector Institute's website has the recording. So if someone is interested, then please feel free to check it out. What I want to kind of focus on today is not kind of the a systemic black box that's less talked about, but rather even the prototypical black box that everyone talks about, which is how the AI systems are designed and trained, and how kind of when you have the final model ready, you don't know all the processes that went underneath to design this model, and some of those processes could have implications that cannot be corrected afterwards once you already have the model ready. And so, and I'm particularly going to talk about the impact of fairness, or impact of these decisions on the fairness of the models. So I don't need to kind of give to this audience a lot of examples on how AI models exhibit bias. And so, I mean, one example is Amazon's AI tool that it released at some point, and this was used to filter down resumes for job applicants. And it quickly learned that the model basically penalized certain words in the resumes, words like women's that would often appear in women's resumes, in things like president of the women's chess club. And so they quickly realized that the model was exhibiting these types of biases, and then they scrapped the tool, I think within a few months of releasing it. But that kind of leads to this question of where is this bias coming from? And of course, one thing that everyone talks about is that there's this data that the AI models are being trained on, and these data are collected from our societal systems. And if these systems are biased, then the data is going to be biased, and then that bias is going to be reflected in the AI models that are trained. So it's not really kind of the models that are inherently biased. It's really the data that's being fed to them that's biased, and kind of what can the model do. But one thing that I think is less often talked about is that sometimes the AI systems, the way that they are trained, can actually hone in on those biases and then amplify those biases in greater proportions than they exist in the data. And so one example that I really like to give is that of translation systems. So this was a very popular example back in 2013 when the fairness literature in AI and machine learning started booming up. And then people kind of noticed that if you use Google Translate and you take an English sentence where you have different kind of genders associated with the different pronouns, and you take a sentence like he's a nurse, she's a doctor, translate it to a language which does not have gendered pronouns like Hungarian. So now you have lost that information, and then you ask it to translate it back. It's regardless of what the gender associations in the original sentence were, the final sentence is always going to be she's a nurse, he's a doctor. Okay, so it's never going to be the opposite. And now for Google Translate, you can kind of give it a leeway because Google Translate is a deterministic system. So if you run this kind of translation many, many times, we know that it's always going to give the same answer. So it has to kind of decide between one of the two answers, and I guess it decides on these answers, right? So even though you might be concerned about the bias here, at some point, because it's a system that doesn't really randomize, it has to give one answer. At the end of the day, you might give it a pass. But you cannot give the same kind of pass to a system like ChatGPT, which is inherently uses randomization, right? So you can actually take a prompt, generate a response, and then click regenerate many times to get different statistically kind of sampled responses from its underlying distribution. And here, so when I first kind of encountered all these large language models, because they are really trained to mimic the underlying data distribution that they are fed, I wasn't really expecting the same kind of problem to arise here. And so when ChatGPT was released, I kind of went on and I tried this prompt, respond with a single word pronoun that fills in the blank. Blank is a nurse. And I mean, this is something I kind of, I prepared this GIF just this morning, so I know that this is still working. You just do this prompt and then you click regenerate, regenerate, regenerate. And every single time it would answer she. Yeah, and so one might wonder why these systems are exhibiting this type of bias. Now here, ChatGPT should be able to provide the answers he, she, and perhaps even other pronouns in certain kind of statistical proportions, in at least reflecting the proportions in which they might occur in the data. And I'm sure that the data would have at least some fraction of nurses being referred to as he or they. And so why is this AI system not just kind of exhibiting the biases that it sees in the data? I mean, the data might already be having kind of very significantly high usage of certain pronouns over other pronouns, which may not reflect how what fraction of nurses, for example, actually exist in the real world who are female versus male versus use other gender associations. So but so not only is kind of the data bias, but then ChatGPT exemplifies and amplifies that bias to return one single pronoun 100% of the time. So why is this happening? So let's look at the current pipeline of the AI training that happens. You take this training data. This is kind of one monolith, certain GBs or TBs of data that you have, all as kind of a single block of just data points. And then you feed this into the model training procedure, and that spits out the model. Of course, there's a human designer sitting underneath all of that, and the human designer is kind of influencing how the training data is obtained, how the training data is selected, how it's represented, what attributes are going to be used to represent the different kind of data points. And then it also influences the training procedure, right? So which kind of architecture to use, which type of AI model to use, what's the training objective that we are going to optimize, and so on and so forth. And some of these choices are really kind of black boxes when you as the end user interact with an AI model. So you don't know what went underneath in training this model, and then those choices can have significant implications on the fairness, and actually are the reason that you see this amplification of bias in the data. And so one question that people have asked in the literature is, can we address this type of bias and bias amplification without opening this black box? Can we just get the final model and then do some kind of post-processing tricks, some post hoc adjustments to remove this bias, or at least remove the amplification of the bias? And there exists some fairness metrics, and these fairness metrics would already fall under what Cristián very nicely said as fairness through awareness. So this is where you actually do use the knowledge of the protected attributes, and you do try to correct all the kind of the different the disparate impact that the model generates on the different individuals or different groups. And some of these definitions, as I mentioned earlier, they rely on these notion of statistical rates, true positive rate, false positive rate, and so on and so forth. And when you have these kind of just rates that you are focusing on, then sometimes it is possible, and there are papers on this in the literature, that you can just take the final model and make a few adjustments to the model to kind of adjust the false positive and the false negative rates across different populations, and just achieve these fairness metrics afterwards. Okay, so you don't really have to open up the black box of how the model was trained. You just get the final model and just make a few changes, and then you can achieve these fairness metrics. But this, I want to claim that this doesn't have any hope of achieving fairness in the sense in which kind of I was talking about in the previous slide, and for a very simple reason. So let's say that you have this kind of data set. This data set is kind of comes from humans, and these humans are expressing preferences over what the final answer should be. And in this case, let's say you have a group of 10 humans, and in response to the prompt that I mentioned, maybe 7 of them say that the answer should be she, 2 of them say that the answer should be he, 1 person says the answer should be they. And then all of this is fed into kind of is combined to create one block of training data. And you can kind of imagine this training data as assigning the average reward to each possible answer. And in this case, you can kind of do a simple linear translation so that she, he, and they have average rewards of say 0.7, 0.2, 0.1. And then this is fed into the model training procedure. And the typical objective function that people try to optimize is kind of minimizing empirical risk or maximizing the average reward. And when you're trying to maximize the average reward, just because she has a higher reward than he and they, so kind of more of the training data leads you to think that you should output she, the model would actually return she 100% of the time. So the key point here is that when you try to maximize the average reward, you wouldn't return she, he, and they 70%, 20%, 10% of the time. You would actually return she 100% of the time, and that would give you the highest average reward. All right, so you might think that, well, this is just a problem of a bad objective function, right? You shouldn't be maximizing the average reward. Maybe you should be trying to do something else. But the problem here is that in a lot of today's AI training pipeline, for example, if you look at the way these ChatGPT and all the other frontier AI systems are trained, and more specifically how they are aligned through some kind of fine tuning and post-processing, what happens is that you take all this training data, which is what some human annotators have said what the system should do, and you combine all of that into a single reward model. And the reward model already assigns kind of these specific rewards to the different answers. And then after that, you have no longer any access to the training data. You are just simply working solely through this single reward model. Yeah. Now you might think, well, this isn't really problematic. If I can see these rewards, maybe I can have some objective function that can say, if the rewards for the different answers are 0.7, 0.2, 0.1, then I should return those answers 70%, 20%, 10% of the time. Well, the problem is that that's not always the right thing to do. Okay, this is the right thing to do if the underlying training data that generated these rewards looked like this. But you could have a different type of underlying training data where every single annotator that you asked said actually that she is the most appropriate answer, he is the next most appropriate answer, and then the next most appropriate answer is there. Okay, and so every annotator thought that she was the better answer. Now in this context, it's a little bit of an awkward example, but there are other contexts where if every single person agrees that some answer is better, then there is a reasonable argument to say that the system should return that answer 100% of the time. And the problem is that when you are working through this single reward model, when you are coalescing all the preferences that all the different annotators and all the different humans are giving you into a single representation of a reward model, then you are losing that information about the diversity that went into this reward model. Okay, so you aren't able to tell whether every single person agreed that these should be the rewards, or whether people actually had genuine disagreements, and then these rewards are calculated by averaging over those disagreements. Then you are losing that fundamental information, and that information is precisely what you need to determine what should be the fair distribution of outcomes. All right, so how can we redesign this pipeline to achieve better equitable representation? This is something that my group and I are currently kind of in the process of rethinking for large language models, but can apply to other AI systems as well. And so one particular insight is, and this comes from social choice theory, which kind of is a field in economics that talks about this collective decision making across a group of humans. So how do you make decisions that affect a group of humans all at the same time? And one kind of key insight that we get from there is that you cannot really merge what different people have said and average over that and just kind of put all of that into a single monolith block of training data. You really have to keep that knowledge with you as you are going into the training phase. You need to know what one person said and how it was different from what the other people said. And then the next bit is that when you are doing the training procedure, your training procedure should be such that it doesn't just cater to the majority. So it shouldn't hone in to what a slight majority of the people are saying and just kind of use those outcomes 100% of the time. Your training procedure should actually embody this idea of proportional fairness, which is to say at a very intuitive level, but something that my group does. I mean, what we spend all of our time on is to convert this idea of proportional fairness into mathematical criteria and into those kind of objective functions that we can train these AI systems on that can actually get them to achieve this proportional fairness. But at an intuitive level, what this says is that the way your AI model should act should be in proportion to how kind of how different groups of people are indicating that the AI model should act. Okay, so the larger if a larger group believes that the AI model should act this way, then the AI model should act that way a larger fraction of the time, but not all the time. Okay, so you should also kind of pay attention to what the minority of the human preferences are, and then kind of exhibit that behavior an appropriate fraction of the time. And so there are certain objective functions that come out of this long literature on social choice theory, which you can use to replace the maximization of average reward. And that in certain contexts have been shown to achieve this type of proportional representation. And the implication is kind of you get these provable fairness guarantees on your model. One guarantee that, again, I would like to describe at just a very high non-technical level, but would be happy to dive into details of if somebody's interested, is something called the core. And at a high level, the core says that if your model, the final model that you trained is in the core, that means that there should be no alternative model that can improve the utility of any subgroup of the human preferences that went into the model that contain X percentage of the whole population by more than 1/X. So if you take so in the typical large language model alignment problem where you get these human annotators to say what the AI system should and shouldn't do, and then you kind of train the AI system based on that. If half of the human annotators said that there shouldn't be any other choice of the large language model, that would more than double the utility of half of the human annotators, or more than triple the utility of any third of the human annotators, or more than quadruple the utility of any fourth of the human annotators, and so on and so forth. Yeah. And this is kind of a guarantee that applies to all the different groups within the human annotators that went, whose preferences went into your model. And so one advantage that this type of fairness guarantee has is that it achieves group fairness without even having to know the groups in advance. And this is very different type of thinking than what goes on in a lot of the machine learning literature, where you have to specify the groups in advance, that I want my model to be fair with respect to white people versus black people, or with respect to men versus women. You might even be allowed to specify several pairs of groups across which you want to be fair, but you cannot be fair to all the groups at the same time. And that's something kind of that my group is exploring more and more. How can we achieve fairness with respect to all possible groups without having to specify them in advance? And this can have a lot of advantages in certain situations because today certain groups are protected, but tomorrow more groups can be protected. I mean, even in Canada, some of the attributes that are protected today, such as sexual orientation, weren't protected a few decades earlier. Right, so you may want to future-proof your system against these kind of changes. And Cristián talked about these kind of legislative changes, right, and how these create disincentives for the financial institutions to actually invest a lot of effort into them, because if tomorrow the regulations change, then all the effort that you have put into today, they might become useless, and this kind of future-proofing can address some of that. Another reason is that we may wish to impose fairness even when that is not legally required for a lot of other reasons, right? I mean, banks care about PR as well. So if it comes out tomorrow that certain banks certain model was really discriminating to people who are in certain category, which the general population would care about, even if the law doesn't really require the bank to be fair across that, it could be a big issue. And then the final thing is that sometimes certain groups that we want to be fair to may not even be definable based on the data that we have, because the certain attributes that we need to define these groups are just missing from the data set. Anyway, I would like to conclude by kind of mentioning a few other black boxes that go into, again, this AI training pipeline, and how these can have an impact on the fairness of the eventual models that are spit out. And so one black box that I didn't talk about until now is the human designer that sits in the back, decides how the training data is going to be obtained, how it's going to be represented, how the model is going to be trained. And here, kind of one thing that's kind of less talked about is that who designs the model can have a lot of impact on the eventual fairness of the model. And that's because the right team of designers can make a lot of choices that can fundamentally transform how the model training works. So I've listed some of the possible ways here. They could identify missing subpopulations in your data. So they can identify gaps in your data sets that are not really capturing certain populations in the population. Or they can identify some missing attributes that are actually relevant for certain subpopulations, right? So maybe trans people, their financial success looks very different, and whether they deserve a loan or not should be determined based on certain attributes that are just missing from the current data. And if that's the case, then any model that you train on that data set is very likely to be unfair to those populations. They can identify overlooked user groups with respect to whom you might want to achieve fairness if you need to pre-specify these groups. They might think about kind of downstream impacts, right? So maybe in the immediate impact, the model seems to be fair, but when you consider certain downstream impacts, then the model can have very disparate downstream impacts on different groups. And so this is something that the right set of designers could anticipate and could build into the model specification beforehand, and so on and so forth. And so I'm really kind of interested in how to formally and systematically think about the impact of these kind of systemic choices on the final fairness of the model in a very quantitative sense. And so just a kind of fun fact, I taught a new graduate course at U of T this winter, which was on mathematical foundations of algorithmic fairness. And one of the problem assignments that I gave to the students was precisely this: describe 3 possible mechanisms through which a more inclusive team of AI engineers and data scientists can actually lead to a fairer model being developed by, I think I gave certain context. I don't remember what the context was, but you can imagine, for example, a financial institution, right? And so students came up with a variety of different mechanisms. Many of them I hadn't even imagined. So many, I mean, some of them are here, but students kind of went even beyond this and identified other mechanisms that I hadn't even imagined beforehand. So this is really important. And I think that this is where the literature should move towards in identifying these types of systemic black boxes and then analyzing their impact on the eventual fairness of the model. There's one more kind of black box that I'll mention that I kind of thought of just as Cristián was presenting his slides, that I didn't put into my slides here, which is whose preferences go into this AI system alignment. So for example, today when OpenAI releases their ChatGPT system, they are getting a lot of human annotators to come into their labs, provide preferences over which responses of ChatGPT are better. And then these preference data are actually fed into the system, and the system is trained based on that to actually make the system kind of better, more fine-tuned. So the system kind of, for example, learns to not provide harmful responses, not provide discriminatory responses, and so on and so forth. And how do you decide whose preferences you are going to throw into this system like that, right? So you are essentially getting the system to align to the norms and values of the population, but you are not really reaching out to the whole population. You are only selecting a few people from the population, and then the system is effectively aligned to their norms and values. And so how do you select these people? The current approach is just an ad hoc approach that's based on stratification, where you make sure that the group of annotators have the right fraction of kind of men versus women versus transgender people, different kind of, you make sure that the different racial demographic composition matches, and so on and so forth. But there is already a literature in social choice that kind of thinks about that, but then goes beyond that, which is called sortition. And this is something that's used for building citizens' assemblies, right? So when we have these citizens' assemblies, that's already solving this problem. How do you select a subset of the people from the whole, let's say, Canadian population who represent the whole Canadian population, and they're going to think on behalf of the whole Canadian population and then come up with some policy guidelines and then inform the policymakers. And another thing that my group is kind of brainstorming is how can we use the algorithms from this sortation literature to select those representatives and then apply that to actually this AI training to kind of decide whose preferences go into the training procedure. All right, so that's where I would like to stop, and happy to go into more detail on any of these aspects.
Thank you to both. And I do, so I did actually have a number of comments to potentially connect and to ask of both of you, but I'm also noticing, cognizant of time and the questions that may be here in the audience here as well as online. But I do have to say, one of the things I do just as a sort of commentary, and to some degree, when I went back to sort of alluding to the notion of the mechanical Turk and what was there, I did find what was really interesting that I think was dispelled in both of yours. More explicitly, Ms. Arg, you were talking about it, but Cristián, I know you also, is this notion of what is data, right? And in both of your discussion, the notion of data as simply being the object that's there, that's used, absent of the set of decision, of annotations, of sort of transformations, of choices that are being made, that then become data, but that there's a set of production around all of those pieces as well, that really do need to be investigated and understood and exposed, as opposed to our easy way of sort of saying that the data is in the spreadsheet, a sort of fast food approach to it. It's there, it's ready-made, I don't really have to think about it. May not be healthy, it may not be good for me, I may not understand why it is I got a stomachache. It is really useful. And I also think what's really interesting in the discussion of both of yours, which I do think is a sort of pervasive set of sort of systemic things that we don't expose or talk about, is number one, the importance. It's why a lot of people think, okay, we're dealing with AI. It's all mathematics. It's all statistics. But in both of your discussions, whether or not it was in financial decision-making, in the sort of modeling of that, other types of modeling, all of those mathematical models are underpinned by a set of social or economic or political theory. And actually knowledgeability of that and the intersection of those pieces are actually really important, not only in understanding the mechanisms for developing and organizing a model, but also the data itself. And I think what was really interesting, and we're not going to be able to get to it, and it's its own panel on its own, was what I think which is the problem, and this is I'm saying this as someone who comes as a political philosopher from that background, the problem of dualistic structures of binary logic. The idea that we talk about these systems and we talk about fairness and we talk about all these biases, and when we say man and woman, but we know, that's a dualism. That's a set of binaries that we then associate with other binaries and other dualistic things. But we know that there isn't a man-woman. It simply doesn't exist. That's right, a Cartesian duality. And the pervasiveness of that into a whole set of other sort of structures and ways of organizing mathematics and all, whatever. But we know that those don't exist. It's not just woman-man. And so I think what both of you were sort of dealing with in different sort of ways, and also ways that were quite similar, is how do you actually reconcile being in a construct where we're continually faced with these notions of Cartesian dualisms, of binary logic, when they don't exist, but then we sort of reproduce them in other structures that we actually don't get to see, that are now making decisions for us under the guise of more advanced applications for decision-making. But I think we should go to the questions that are there. Not dragging this, okay, recording can be accessible, yes. Louise, not immediately. Louise, do you want to, I can bring up should we bring up the chat on this screen, or Louise, do you want to?
No, there are some questions that were directed internally, so I don't know.
Are there also some internal ones we can? Okay. I've got some other ones, but let's deal with these ones first.
They are not questions though, so there are things. So I'm just going to read them out loud.
Yep.
You can see them in the chat too.
Ms. Ark, have you seen them, or useful to read it out in the chat?
Yeah. So
yeah, no, I've read them and I agree. These are very nice points.
they are very interesting comments about some specifics of the financial system. And thank you to Henry and to Jason for their comments. So the first one is about GICs, that they can be renewed without consent. or notice, right? The fact that they are going against the Banking Act, that's a direct violation of the Banking Act. And I think that goes back to my comment on the problems with financial conduct, since it's not a source of financial instability. The OFI doesn't really involve with that. But, and the FCSA probably just send them a strongly worded letter, but they can just ignore it if they so desire. Right, the Banking Ombudsman, which the government regulators of banks, requires the consumers to take actions to cancel GIC within 2 weeks to get your money back, or otherwise you don't have your money until the GIC matures, which may be a year, 2 years, 3 years into the future. So it really sucks. It appears consumers are vulnerable about default under various laws. I imagine customers afford to talk to AIs completely for problem resolution. Yeah, that's a very scary future to imagine. I hope we never get to that. And Jason was agreeing with me on the part on short-term pay part, as there are always demographic dynamics, maybe latent ones or Gen Z's up and comers inject some new social mores or trends are as yet unforeseen, as the institutions have to spend a bit more time to catch up. But when they do, things are so much better for all. And I think this really circles back to the comment that you were making about data, and a comment I made about, and I gotta say that, and I'm sorry to disagree with you, my friend, I think that we do not just need something that's proportionally fair, because that's just one definition of fairness, and they may be regulated away, and then you're in the same ballpark, but also in the fact that there is unseen data, and the data is biased sometimes, is going to become biased because societies evolve, right? And that evolution, and that means that no static system is ever going to be one size fits ever. And that's why humans are always necessary. And that's why many of the fears of AI, I think, are really forgetting of the fact that society is not static. It's actually dynamic. And responding to that dynamics needs maybe the same measures that Nasir is creating can guide you in identifying when those drifts are dangerous, right? So maybe an idea is to take the same thing and say like, okay, this is the way that we should evaluate our models ongoingly, to understand in a quantitative way when the drift has actually caused or reflected a change in society. And we need as humans to react and readjust our systems, right?
The interesting thing, though, is that in terms of that discussion around model drift, and I know that Nizarg and I have talked about this, and we've actually talked about this within the CRA as well. Nizarg and I have also worked maybe a little longer with together. But what is the notion actually, as you're discussing, the notion, the importance of drift. But what becomes really interesting in that world of AI with model drift is that the touch points for the identification of a drift tend to be themselves very technical or statistical in nature, as opposed to really addressing or considering the broader sets of dynamics that are actually happening, which is really an interesting thing. It's not always the case, but is often what is driving that notion of drift. So even that.
Yeah, and also a lot of these, as you said, so I mean, any measure of fairness is inherently a dynamic goal. So you have to make sure that the system remains fair. So you have to have those procedures in place to constantly evaluate. And there is a lot of literature on kind of distributional shifts and how kind of the model impacts can change over time and how to kind of readjust the model. But all of these checks are based on kind of continuously observing impact and then detecting a change in impact and then going from there. I mean, this has two problems. One is that your methods for measuring impact are based on the current systems. Now, certain societal drifts that happen actually fundamentally change how you should measure impact. And if you are using the old ways of measuring impact, this is just going to be missed, right? And then the second thing is that even if you detect a change in impact, it doesn't always kind of lead you to the root cause of what's causing the impact and what you need to fix in order to kind of get the model to be fair again. For example, you have this kind of new Gen Z population coming up, and kind of it doesn't necessarily tell you that that their preferences are not kind of in your AI model, and that's kind of what you need to fix. So, yeah.
Excellent. Luis.
If you speak, or I can mute myself.
And now you're free.
Okay. I want to say thanks. This is really enlightening how important, to me, how important data are and how good quality data ends up with hopefully better quality models. But there's a lot of trust. You were talking earlier, Dr. Bravo, on trust and the trustworthiness of the model. But there also has to be trust in the institutions who are collecting the data. And there has to be trust that the data that's being collected is going to be used appropriately. So can you go into that? Because you said you felt the institution should be allowed to collect some of the attributes that we don't want them to necessarily collect. How are you going to overcome that trust issue? Having worked at StatsCan for a number of years, the respondents don't like to trust, and StatsCan works very hard to have and create strong trust in the data that they're collecting and how it's going to be used, and have governance structures on how the data are going to be used. Are financial institutions trustable with all of that data?
That's actually a great question. And let me unsilence myself so I to see it or not. And I actually had it on my slides, right? And in my slides, I didn't went to that part in the spirit of time, but I did say that we cannot force people to do this, and there are many mechanisms to make it trustworthy. Can be by design, such as doing centrally somehow at some sort of regulatory level, doing it by a third party. My honest comment is that I agree with you. There are two things here. There is one, how we communicate to the public that this may be trustworthy, but also how do we ensure that they are trustworthy? So what do I mean by that is, how do I not ensure that by myself revealing my gender, my sexual preferences, etc., that's not going to be used to target me with more targeted ads, right? And I think right now there is very limited insights. Every day there is a little bit more about how we do that every day, right? If you're on Instagram and you put a picture with a certain flag, that's going to recognize you as a certain sexual orientation, maybe, right? Or if you are detected at your location at a gay parade or a strip club, that may determine, right? And that may determine many issues there. Thank you, Oliver. That may determine as well significant things. So right now, we have given a lot of trust to a whole bunch of tech companies that are doing that. And I do think that as we make these systems more explicitly fair, and when we're asking for measures, we're going to need to tackle who handles this information in a secure way. It may be that it's going to need to be centrally done, but we are at a point in modern development and more democracy in which even government institutions are highly unreliable by the people. Oh, they are not unreliable. They are not trusted by the people. That's what I wanted to say. Sorry for the mistranslation in my head. They are not trusted by the people. So maybe some people, and in the US, some surveys have said so, some people trust Google more than the federal government, right? So where exactly the chips fall on that, I do not have an answer yet. I think there is a lot to say here about education, in the sense of saying, like, this is for everyone's good if you will reveal this. Otherwise, we won't know if people are misbehaving. But who should control the data? How should the data be protected? How should it be controlled? I don't have an answer yet. I know what I wouldn't like to see myself. I wouldn't like a credit bureau. I wouldn't like a fairness bureau, a private company that handles all of this data, like it happens today with credit scores, right? but I don't have a better answer for you than saying that we haven't even solved that yet for financial data, for private data. We don't know. Maybe we should go and ask to someone that already has it, like the CRA in many cases, right?
Yeah, but
But
we all laugh about that.
exactly, but
That this
good
portion
luck
needs to
getting
be
that.
removed from the.
But good luck trying to get the public to trust you on that.
Yeah, so those are excellent points, Christian, and I just want to echo some of that and add some more things that are happening from the literature side. So I agree that transparency on a lot of different aspects is the key to building trust in these systems. And so, for example, there are and Ruth and I have talked about this before. There are approaches in the literature on creating data fact sheets, and model fact sheets, and these basically should always accompany any AI model that is being used, and should record exactly what type of data was collected and was fed into the model. So, for example, if you see that a bank was using, I mean, you don't need to see the bank's data. Certainly, that data is the bank's kind of proprietary, property. But if you have access to at least the attributes that the banks are using, you can already say, hey, you know what? I don't know why you are not using this particular attribute to decide whether or not I'm worth giving a loan to, because I think that for the demographic that I belong to, this attribute is really the key to financial success, right? It's really something that should determine whether or not someone would be able to repay the loan. And same thing goes with the model fact sheet, where you basically record the different choices that went into the designing the model. Now, this can be kind of maybe a little bit less accessible to the general population, but still, I think it's nice to have this along with the model. Another thing that I've emphasized in my work quite a bit is the role of explanations, right? So whenever you provide any decisions, so whenever the bank approves or rejects a loan, it should come with an explanation. And there is a huge literature on explainable AI and kind of thinking about how we can come up with simple and intuitive explanation that are still accurate, at least to a great degree, to explain why the model made certain decisions, and in particular what you as an individual can do to, for example, change that decision in the future, right? So if today my loan was rejected, what should I do differently going forward, so that in 5 years when I apply for the loan again, I have a better hope of getting accepted, right? So these kind of information is very useful. So my collaborators and I have this not-for-profit website, splitit.org, and what we have done is we have just taken a bunch of kind of provably fair automated decision-making tools that existed in the literature, and then just deployed them to the website for people to access free of cost. And more than 250,000 people have used these websites for their everyday problems. Things like, how do I share the rent between the different roommates, or how do I divide up household chores in a fair manner? Or if someone dies and leaves behind an estate, then how should this estate be divided in a fair manner, and so on and so forth. And one thing that kind of is very crucial on that website is that when we kind of, the algorithm spits out a decision, it also explains to the end users why that decision is fair. Okay, so if you're interested, go try it out and see kind of what kind of explanations we generate there. And so all of these different kind of manners of transparency can build trust. Now, this is what the corporations can do. I think from the government side, there also needs to be more transparency as to what regulatory mechanisms are in place to prevent certain bad things from happening, right? And I kind of immediately think of the Boeing example, which is in the news right now. And one of the things that kind of many people didn't know and now are suddenly realizing is that for a lot of regulations, Boeing was allowed to self-regulate. Essentially, Boeing, the regulators who are kind of who are going and checking all the planes for defects and whatnot, they were on the Boeing payroll, right? And so, and the reason this was done is that kind of there was a belief that, oh, these technologies are so advanced that only Boeing employees would know how to actually examine Boeing planes. And I think that this is a particularly flawed approach. we are seeing the same kind of philosophy arise again in this AI world nowadays, that all these kind of companies are developing very frontier AI systems, and only Google, Meta, and OpenAI and Anthropic would actually know how to make sure that their models are aligned, and how to make sure that their models wouldn't cause any catastrophic risks. And there is kind of a new wave saying that no, that's not necessarily true, and there is a lot of expertise out there kind of outside of these institutions, and we need to have external checks that are kind of imposed on these institutions. So the final thing that kind of Cristián said about training, I think that there's a lot to it. I've emphasized this again and again, that we need to kind of increase awareness on different aspects. We need to kind of train the employees in the private and public sector on the kind of the risks of AI technologies and how to mitigate these risks, how to design better AI technologies. What I'm doing at U of T is introducing something called embedded ethics modules in my courses. So this is where students, in the context of the course that they are going through, they kind of think about the different ethical problems that can arise. They reason about these ethical problems, they discuss with one another, come up with some mitigation strategies, and then generally practice voicing their own thoughts around these issues, so that when they go to a company and they work there and they notice certain ethical concerns, they kind of have the confidence to be able to raise these concerns. So and then finally, I'm kind of working with this nonprofit AIGS Canada to kind of we are exploring launching a national conversation on AI, where through various town halls and seminars and courses and citizens assemblies, we can have the public voice into this kind of AI regulatory scene built in.
I was going to say, Nizar, we are at time, but both of you, thank you so much. And I do want to add, I know, thank you for everybody who's actually in the room, who stayed here and who stayed on for the full time over. I do want to really not only express my thanks to Louise, to Tyler, to Sandra, to the people who've helped to facilitate this, as well as obviously to Cristián and Nizar, who I did select because not only is their academic work exemplary, but I've actually seen both of you in action in terms of really putting on the ground the things that you're trying to model, that you're trying to move forward vis-a-vis inclusivity, vis-a-vis really thinking about fairness very considerately. I do want to end on one piece, which I do think is interesting. Number one, Louise, what I do think is really interesting about the invoking this question of trust, which I think is very interesting in the context of discussing AI fairness, is that when we, typically speaking, look at the literature on AI fairness, what gets invoked is bias. But what we don't see as often, but which is just as instrumental, if not more instrumental, in really thinking about what fairness fundamentally is about, which is actually fundamentally to build relations of trust that then can foreground a whole other set of structures and actions. But what we don't actually see in the literature is a huge connection. When we talk about AI fairness, when we talk about XAI, when we talk about these systems around black boxes, about trust. And so that's really interesting. And to your point, Nizar, can I end on this, which would be a fabulous, if we're going to do, and hopefully we will have more inclusivity in AI panels, which is the notion of thinking about the role and the hidden roles of including the public and meaningful public participation as a kind of systemic black box that we need to explore in the context of broader decision-making, whether or not it's policy, whether or not it's any of the things we're talking about, whether or not it's models, whether or not it's data, but to think about meaningful inclusion of the public and different publics actually is a part of the systemic black box problem that we're having currently with AI systems. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for the 17 who still stayed on. Again, I hope everyone enjoyed themselves and learned something.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for inviting.
Our pleasure.
I like to just echo, and I am going to echo.
There you are.
I'd like to just echo Ruth's thank you to everyone. I want to really thank all of the panelists especially those who traveled to be with us today. Cristián, we really appreciate it. And Dr. Shaw, you chose a good day to stay away. It's just pouring with rain. So we're all going to get soaked on the way home. This is the last of the inaugural series in the Inclusive Innovation Speakers series. So I'd like to thank everyone who's participated in this inaugural season. We are trying to set up next year. We do have Shobita. Why can't people have two-letter last names? Partha Safari speaking on innovation as a form of equity on September 24th. And we're having Dan Monroe, who is going to be talking about the Inclusive Innovation Monitor as a cautionary tale on October the 8th. We're asking you to use the Connect with Us on the i2 Hub to let us know and make suggestions, like Ruth just did, for inclusive innovation speakers, as well as topics, what you'd like to hear and who you would like to hear, because this series is for everyone. And I'm going to wish everyone a wonderful summer, and it's September 24th, and I need to thank everyone who helped us organize this today, and thank you for bearing with our technical. Alyssa, Nina, Tyler, Sandra, Francoise, and the list goes on, as well as Ruth, Dr. Shaw, and Dr. Bravero. Thank you very much. Good night. Goodbye.
Thank you.